Morena Koto, welcome to Story Time for today. Great to see you all online with me. Hope you had a great weekend and that with Father's Day being yesterday, that you looked after your dads or those significant people in your life. Okay, today we're going to be reading a story called Now Wash Your Hands, which I think is quite appropriate, the fact in the season that we're in. Also, now I'm not too sure how much time we'll be able to get through this, but we'll at least get a start on The Magic Finger by Roald Dahl. It's quite a short story, so we should be able to get it through. Hopefully, we might be back at school sometime this week, and that would be very exciting. All right, so Now Wash Your Hands by Matt Carr. At school, the kids were running wild, the thing that kids do best, when Mrs. Moo came into the room with a very special guest. Dr. Puss Doris is here today for a really important chat, so make sure that you're listening and sitting on the mat. Hello. I'd like to tell you all about something very, very small. In fact, they are so teeny weeny, you can't see them at all. And they're going, what? We like to call them germs, and it's you they want to hug. We love you. But the only trouble is they can give you a nasty bug. How many germs would fit on this spoon? The first paw in the air was William's. Is it about 100? He said. No, it's more like 1,000,000. But the good news is there's a simple thing that little germs can't stand. If you don't want them to hang around, all you do is wash your hands. The germ's going, I'm out of here. When you've been down on the farm, Mabel playing with lambs, do you know what you need to do next? Yes, you wash your hands. Or if you're in the garden with Mum potting up some plants, you wash your hands when you get inside. Don't give those germs a chance. And Kenny, what about in the toilet when you've done a wee or a poo? Do you wash your hands, miss? Yes, it's the only thing to do. The lunch bell rang in the classroom and the kids began to stand. But what do we do before we eat our food? But you can guess. Now we wash our hands. Is Dr. Pastoris not having lunch? She'll be here in a minute. She's got a lot of hands to wash. So Doris has got a hand washing song. Wash your hands, it's easy. Oh, wash your hands, it's fun. Oh, wash your hands so you don't pass on germs to anyone. Use lots of soap and water, then dry them when you're done. It's a simple way to keep germs at bay. Wash your hands, everyone. And it gives a little demonstration of what to do when we wash our hands. And we're getting pretty good at that we do our palms, the back of our hands between the fingers and the back of the fingers and the fingertips. And don't forget our thumbs. And then we have to make sure that we dry them really, really well. So when we get back to school, there'll be hand sanitizer and things like that. So we just have to remember to do those things. Awesome. All right. Roald Dahl's The Magic Finger. And so there's the girl in the story. There's Philip Gregg, William Gregg, and Mr. and Mrs. Gregg. And they are the characters in this story. So here we go. The farm next to ours is owned by Mr. and Mrs. Gregg. The Greggs have 2 children, both of them boys. Their names are Philip and William. Sometimes I go to the farm to play with them. I'm a girl and I'm 8 years old. Philip is also 8 years old. William is 3 years older. He's 10. Oh, what? All right then. He's 11. Last week, something very funny happened to the Gregg family. I'm going to tell you about it as best I can. Now, the one thing that Mr. Gregg and his 2 boys loved to do more than anything else, was to go hunting. Every Saturday morning, they would take their guns to go off into the woods to look for animals and birds to shoot. Even Philip, who was only 8 years old, had his own gun. I can't stand hunting. I just can't stand it. It doesn't seem right to me that men and boys should kill animals just for the fun they get out of it. So I used to try and stop Philip and William from doing it. Every time I went over to their farm, I would do my best to talk them out of it, but they only laughed at me. I even said something about it once to Mr. Greg, but he just walked out on past me as if I weren't there. Then one Saturday morning, I saw Philip and William coming out of the woods with their father, and they were carrying a lovely young deer. This made me so cross, I started shouting at them. The boys laughed and made faces, and Mr. Greg told me to go home and mind my own P's and Q's. Well, that did it. I saw red. And before I was able to stop myself, I did something I never meant to do. I put the magic finger on them all. Oh dear. Oh dear. I even put it on Mrs. Greg, who wasn't there. I put it on the whole Greg family. For months, I'd been telling myself that I would never put the magic finger upon anyone again. Not after what happened to my teacher, old Mrs. Winter. Poor old Mrs. Winter. One day we were in class and she was teaching us spelling. Stand up, she said to me, and spell cat. Well, that's an easy one, I said. K-A-T. You are a stupid little girl, Mrs. Winter said. I'm not a stupid little girl, I cried. I'm a very nice little girl. Go and stand in the corner, Mrs. Winter said. Then I got cross and I saw red. And I put the magic finger on Mrs. Winter good and strong, and almost at once, guess what? Whiskers began growing out of her face. They were long black whiskers, just like the ones you see on a cat, only much bigger. And how fast they grew. Before we had time to think, they were out to her ears. Of course, the whole class started screaming with laughter, and then Mrs. Winter said, "Will you be so kind as to tell me what you find so madly funny, will you?" And then she turned to write something on the blackboard. We saw that she had grown a tail as well. It was a huge bushy tail. I cannot begin to tell you what happened after that, but if any of you are wondering whether Mrs. Winter is quite all right now, the answer is no. And she never will be. The magic finger is something I've been able to do in life. I can't tell you just how I do it because I don't even know myself, but it always happens when I get cross, when I see red. Then I get very, very hot all over, and the tip of my forefinger on my right hand begins to tingle most terribly, and suddenly sort of a flash comes out of me, a quick flash, like something electric. It jumps out and touches the person who made me cross. And after that, the magic finger is upon them or her, and things begin to happen. Well, the magic finger was now upon the whole of the Greg family. There was no taking it off again. I ran home and waited for things to happen. And they certainly happened fast. I shall now tell you what those things were. I got the whole story from Philip and William the next morning, after it was all over. In the afternoon of the very same day that I put the magic finger on the Greg family, Mr. Greg and Philip and William went out hunting once again. This time they were going after wild ducks, so they headed towards the lake. In the first hour, they got 10 birds, and the next hour they got 6. What a day, cried Mr. Greg. This is the best yet. He was beside himself with joy. Just then, 4 more wild ducks flew over their heads. They were flying very low. They were easy to hit. Bang, 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 went the guns. The ducks flew on. We missed, said Mr. Greg. That's funny. And to everyone's surprise, the 4 ducks turned around and came flying back to the guns. Hey, said Mr. Greg, what on earth are they doing? They're really asking for it this time. He shot at them again. So did the boys, and again they all missed. Mr. Greg got very red in the face. It's the light, he said. It's getting too dark to see. Let's go home. So they started for home, carrying with them the 16 birds they had shot before. But the 4 ducks would not leave them alone. They now began flying around and around the hunters as they walked away. Mr. Greg did not like this one bit. Be off, he cried, and he shot at them many more times, but it was no good. He simply could not hit them. All the way home, those 4 ducks flew around in the sky above their heads, and nothing could make them go away. Late that night, after Philip and William had gone to bed, Mr. Greg went outside to get some wood for the fire. He was crossing the yard when all at once he heard the call of a wild duck in the sky. Quack! He stopped and looked up. The night was very still. There was a thin yellow moon over the trees on the hill, and the sky was filled with stars. Then Mr. Gregg heard the noise of wings flying low over his head. He saw the 4 ducks, dark against the night sky, flying very close together. They were going around and around the house. Mr. Gregg forgot about the firewood and hurried back indoors. He was now quite afraid. He did not like what was going on, but he said nothing about it to Mrs. Gregg. All he said was, "Come on, let's go. Let's get going to bed. I feel tired." And so he went to bed and to sleep. When morning came, Mr. Gregg was the first to wake up. He opened his eyes and he was about to put out a hand for his watch to see the time, but his hand wouldn't come out. "That's funny," he said. "Where's my hand?" He lay still, wondering what was up. Maybe he had hurt his hand in some way. He tried the other hand. That wouldn't come out either. He sat up, and for the first time he saw what he looked like. He gave a yell and jumped out of bed. Mrs. Gregg woke up, and when she saw Mr. Gregg standing there on the floor, she gave a yell too. For now he was a tiny little man. He was maybe as tall as the seat of a chair, but no taller. And where his arms had been, he had a pair of duck wings instead. What? Cried Mrs. Gregg, going purple in the face. "My dear man, what's happened to you?" "What's happened to both of us, you mean?" shouted Mr. Gregg. It was Mrs. Gregg's turn now to jump out of bed. She ran to look at herself in the glass, but she was not tall enough to see into it. She was even smaller than Mr. Gregg, and she too had got wings instead of arms. Oh, sobbed Mrs. Gregg. "This is witch's work," cried Mr. Gregg, and both of them started running around the room, flapping their wings. A minute later, Philip and William burst in. The same thing had happened to them. They had wings and no arms, and they were really tiny. They were almost as big as robins. "Mama, Mama, Mama," chirped Philip. "Look, Mama, we can fly." And they flew up into the air. "Come down at once," Mrs. Gregg said. "You're much too high." But before she could say another word, Philip and William had flown right out of the window. Mr. and Mrs. Gregg ran to the window and looked out. The 2 tiny boys were now high up in the sky. Then Mrs. Gregg said to Mr. Gregg, "Do you think we can do that, my dear?" "I don't see why not," Mr. Gregg said. "Come on, let's try." Mr. Gregg began to flap his wings hard, and all at once, up he went. Then Mrs. Gregg did the same. "Help!" she cried as she started going up. "Save me!" "Come on," said Mr. Gregg. "Don't be afraid." So out the window they flew up into the sky, and it did not take them long to catch up with Philip and William. Soon the whole family was flying around and around together. "Oh, isn't this lovely?" cried William. "I've always wanted to know how it feels to be like a bird." "Your wings are not getting tired, are they, dear?" Mr. Gregg asked Mrs. Gregg. "Not at all," Mrs. Gregg said. "I would go on forever." "Hey, look down there," said Philip. "Somebody's walking in our garden." They all looked down, and there below them, in their own garden, they saw 4 enormous wild ducks. The ducks were as big as men, and what is more, they had great long arms like men instead of wings. The ducks were walking in a line to the door of the Greggs' house, swinging their arms and holding their beaks high in the air. "Stop!" called the tiny Mr. Gregg, flying down low over their heads. "Go away! That's my house!" The ducks looked up and quacked. The first one put out a hand, opened the door of the house, and went in. The others went in after him, and the door shut. The Greggs flew down and sat on the wall near the door. Mrs. Gregg began to cry. Oh dear, she sobbed. "They've taken our house. What shall we do? We have no place to go." Even the boys began to cry a bit now. "We'll be eaten by cats and foxes in the night," said Philip. "I want to sleep in my own bed," said William. "Now then," said Mr. Gregg, "it isn't any good crying. That won't help us. Shall I tell you what we're going to do?" "What?" they said. Mr. Gregg looked at them and smiled. "We're going to build a nest." "A nest?" they said. "Can we do that?" "We must do it," said Mr. Gregg. "We've got to have somewhere to sleep. Follow me." They flew off to a tall tree, and right at the top of it, Mr. Gregg chose the place for the nest. "Now we want sticks," he said. "Lots and lots of little sticks. Off you go, all of you. Find them and bring them back here." "But we have no hands," said Philip. "Then use your mouths." Mrs. Gregg and the children flew off, and soon they were back carrying sticks in their mouths. Mr. Gregg took the sticks and started to build the nest. More, he said. I want more and more and more sticks. Keep going. The nest began to grow, and Mr. Gregg was very good at making the sticks stick together. After a while, he said, That's enough sticks. Now I want leaves and feathers and things like that to make the inside nice and soft. The building of the nest went on and on. It took a long time, but at last it was finished. Try it, said Mr. Gregg, hopping back. He was very pleased with his work. Oh, isn't this lovely? Cried Mrs. Gregg, going into it and sitting down. I feel like I might lay an egg any moment. The others all got him beside her. How warm it is, said William. And what fun it is to be living up so high, said Philip. We may be small, but nobody can hurt us up here. But what about food, said Mrs. Gregg. We haven't got a thing to eat all day. That's right, Mr. Gregg said. So now fly back in the house, go and by an open window and get a tin of biscuits when the ducks aren't looking. Oh, we'll be picked to bits by those dirty great big ducks, cried Mrs. Gregg. We shall be very careful, my love, said Mr. Gregg, and off they went. But when they got into the house, they found all the windows and doors closed, and there was no way in. All right, we're going to stop there. We'll carry on with the magic finger tomorrow. Tomorrow will hopefully be our last story time together, but we'll just see what happens when the Prime Minister makes her announcement a bit later this afternoon. Hey, great to have you all on for story time today. I hope you have a great day. Have fun at Bubble School, everyone in Bubble class. And for those of you who are still learning and working from home, work really hard. Make sure that you're being kind to your whānau, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow. Ka kite anō.